Happy Wednesday, folks, and welcome to episode 547 of #AskGSM here today for Wednesday, May 22nd, 2024. I'm Graham GSM Matthews. Hope you guys are doing well and having a great week so far. If you want to send in a question to the show, you can do so by tweeting me on the Twitter machine at WrestleRant with the #AskGSM. Find me on Facebook as well, facebook.com/Graham.GSM.Matthews. Drop a comment on the post I usually put up on Tuesday nights, if not on the wall itself. Last but certainly not least, drop your question down below in the comment section on this very video, and I'll include your question in next week's edition. So let's get right into it here. Jordan B. from YouTube, their question was, what are your thoughts on Blake Howard's commentary on Main Event and Level Up so far? I think he's good. I've enjoyed his commentary so far. I don't know where he came from as far as where his background is, what promotion he was working with, or what network he was with, or whatever. Maybe Reality of Wrestling. I could be wrong. Probably am wrong on that, but he's good. Is he like future of Monday Night Raw worthy? I think it's too soon to tell. But as someone who watches Main Event, as someone who watches Level Up, and you would know that if you read my reviews on WrestleRant.com and no one else, listen, I watch it so you don't have to. Look at it that way. I think he does a good job. So we'll see where he goes from here. And, he's kind of not like generic, but I feel like I've said the same thing about Tom Phillips in the past and every other guy they've had in that spot for the last 10, 15 years. Tom Phillips did last a long time before he got cut in 2020, 2021. But I think he's a good addition to the roster, and we'll see how he kind of pans out from here. Micah Does It from YouTube, their question was, why is WWE booking Jey Uso so terribly? He split from his brother to be a singles wrestler, but hasn't held a singles championship. His only accomplishment is winning the tag titles with Cody. We all know he's about to be put back in the Bloodline story again. He's mega over, so I just don't understand WWE's booking of Jey Uso. What are your thoughts on this? I think it's completely fine. I don't think he's been booked perfectly, but I also don't think he's in a situation where he's being booked terribly either. Like, he doesn't lose every single match. Before, WrestleMania, the guy had not won a televised singles match in quite some time. Or maybe it wasn't before Mania, but I know Jimmy Uso, that was the case. But I think I'm thinking of Jimmy in Solo. But Jey Uso, to his credit, or in their defense, whatever, at least in his case, he wasn't really winning whatever it mattered most. And that still is the case. He did win at WrestleMania in that mediocre match with Jimmy. But beyond that, he really hasn't won, like you said, a singles championship, hasn't won King of the Ring. I don't think he should have, though. Anyone having an issue, I think, with Gunther beating him, if Gunther had lost, he would have been fine, too. I just wasn't really high on the idea of Jey Uso winning King of the Ring. Yeah, it would have given him a singles accomplishment. First of all, we would have gotten Jey and Tama Tonga in the finals, which sounds just not overly exciting at all. But I think the issue with the King of the Ring going to Jey is that if they had Jey win, it would have solely been used as a vehicle to further the Bloodline storyline. Not any sort of indication that they plan to put a singles belt on Jey anytime soon. He just contended for the World Heavyweight Championship at Backlash earlier this month, and he lost. So it's not as if the World Heavyweight Championship is the next step. I've said this before, Jey Uso, to me, is not World Heavyweight Championship material. If they have him win it for a one-off, have like a brief Jeff Hardy-like run or a Kofi Kingston-esque run from 2019, that would be fine. But I'm saying long-term, the guy is just not world champion material. I think even the Gunther match, they had a good match on Monday, but it paled in comparison to some of the matches Gunther's had as of late with Sami Zayn and Ilya Dragunov. Yeah, obviously those guys are both better workers than Jey Uso. Jey Uso just, as soon as that bell rings, he's just not overly great in the ring. I feel like I'm seeing the same Jey Uso match a lot of the time. He has the crowd behind him enough to where, even the Finn Balor match, the match that he had with Finn Balor a couple of weeks ago, I was at that show in Hartford. I said to people I was there with, there really wasn't anything special about that match at all. They had a very good match, but that was entirely because the crowd was so behind Jey Uso. It was not because it was this great in-ring mat classic. They had a very WWE-style match. Jey Uso works very well in WWE-style matches, and that's not a bad thing. But I just don't really think that, for as over as he is, right now anyway, he's not strong enough on the mic, and he has had compelling promos in the past, but recently, to me, he's been very one-dimensional. So back to your original question of, why has he been booked so terribly? I wouldn't say he's been booked so terribly. If he was being booked terribly, he wouldn't be on the show. The guy's as over as he is. If they weren't putting him on the show, or he was losing to fucking Otis or something every week, that would be a bigger problem. He can beat the lower card, mid-card guys, but he can't beat the people that actually matter, like a Rollins or a Gunther or whoever, which is the right call right now. I think they have to figure out where they're going with Jey Uso, because you mentioned, we all know he's going to be put back in the Bloodline storyline at some point alongside his brother. We all know the reunion with Jimmy Uso is coming. I just wouldn't do it anytime soon. Jimmy Uso might still be hurt for a while anyway. We don't know the nature of his injury. I know he was written off the show a month ago, but legitimately, apparently he was injured, so I don't know when he's due back. I don't know what the injury is. I don't know if that was ever disclosed. So he might be gone for a while anyway. They just need to figure out, what are we doing with this guy? Like, I don't see him winning the World Heavyweight Championship anytime soon. I don't even see him winning the Intercontinental Championship anytime soon. Could he be the guy to beat Chad Gable for that belt? Yeah, that's possible. I was thinking Sheamus. I mean, we're jumping the gun here assuming Chad Gable's winning the belt on Saturday. He fucking should. Whether he wins it on Saturday or soon after, I kind of feel like it has to happen on Saturday. Because if you wait any longer, then Chad Gable's just a loser. They might not put the belt on Chad at all. I don't see Jey Uso beating Sammy. That is possible given their history. I don't know if they did have a one-on-one match, actually, in the post-WrestleMania SmackDown a year ago. I think Jey Uso actually won that match. So you could run that back and have Jey Uso beat Sammy. I would rather it just be Chad, personally. I would give Chad a run before Jey. You could give him that championship. I think he's definitely Intercontinental Championship worthy. It's just more a matter of when and what you do with him in the meantime. I honestly do not know what you do with Jey until you get to that point. So unless he enters the Intercontinental Championship conversation next week on Raw, which he very well could, they gotta find a good feud for him that does not involve the Bloodline in the meantime. The guy's entire identity for the last, really obviously his entire career, has either been his brother, teaming with his brother, feuding with his brother, or teaming and feuding with the Bloodline. They need to put the guy in a feud that's not over anything Bloodline related. Now that he's on Raw, away from them for right now, and Jimmy Uso might not be back anytime soon, have him feud with someone like a Braun Breaker. Have him feud with someone like, who's another heel on Raw? Raw's got a lot of baby faces. Drew McIntyre we've already seen. But, someone like that, or Damian Priest. Again, I guess we already saw that too, so I take that back. He has had feuds that are not involving his family, I guess. He just doesn't win. He's got to be put in a high-profile program that is not Bloodline related, but that he wins. That is the key. I'm not really sure who that's with, but that's what they need to figure out. Emmanuel A. from YouTube, their first question was, do you think Sheamus has had the perfect career in reverse? I remember people used to say this a lot when he was in the bar with Cesaro, since he went from multi-time world champion to mid-carder to tag team wrestler. Do you think the sentiment is still true now, and that if Sheamus had his WWE and World Heavyweight Championship reigns in this decade instead of in the early 2010s, would his main event pushes have been more successful? That's a great question. I did not honestly see that assessment during the bar days as far as his career, having the perfect career in reverse, because you're right, a lot of people go from the tag team stuff to the mid-card stuff, from the mid-card stuff to the tag team stuff, and then to the main event. Sheamus started right out in the main events, and not that he hasn't been back there since, because he did get a brief run, obviously, as WWE Champion in 2015. That whole thing was completely fucking garbage, though. That was during, the League of Nations days. I think they formed League of Nations when he was WWE Champion. I was thinking they formed it when he lost the championship, but no, they formed it right after he became champion. I think. I could be wrong on the timing there. But the faction sucked. He was champion for a month. He was never booked well. He lost matches. He lost matches even before he became champion, which I know sounds commonplace, but he was like Mr. Money in the Bank. And again, that's also commonplace, where they would beat the winner week and week and week. They did the same thing with Austin Theory and Damian Sandow and all these other people, even Damian Priest to a certain extent. Not as much as these other guys, but he was still losing a lot of matches. And then when he finally cashed in, no one gave a shit. Like when Sheamus first came back as a heel in 2015, I was excited because we hadn't seen him as a heel in a long time. He had the new look, the new theme, the new vibe to him. They had him win Money in the Bank. I was cool with that. And then he just kept losing. And no one gave a shit after a certain point. So when he did cash in, it wasn't really a believable World Heavyweight Championship run or a WWE title run or whatever it was. It was the WWE World Heavyweight Championship at that point, I think in late 2015. No, I think calling it the perfect career in reverse is honestly really, really accurate. Because you're right. He really has, when he says he's done it all, he really has. Not only having won everything but the Intercontinental Championship. He hasn't won the Universal Championship. That's gone now anyway. We have the World Heavyweight Championship back. He did hold that, but not that championship specifically. Regardless, He's a multi-time world champion, United States champion, tag team champion, and on top of that, he won the Rumble, Money in the Bank, and King of the Ring even in 2010. So he really has had an amazing career, and he's so much better now than he was in 2010. And I liked Sheamus in 2009, when he was WWE champion. But that was around the point where they were still very heavily pushing John Cena, Batista, Undertaker. He was kind of part-time at that point. But people like that. That was when those people were kind of on their way out. Edge as well. So those people were kind of prioritized over Sheamus. Not to mention his push towards the main event scene. They really wanted new people on top. That was what your next question's about, which we'll get to. They really wanted fresh blood at the top of the card. They just didn't build these people up properly. So Sheamus went from being on ECW to then coming to Raw within a matter of months and beating Jamie Noble and squashing him to then challenging for the WWE Championship. And if you have someone that's ready for that spot, that's a cool little thing to do where you immediately catapult them to World Championship contention. But he wasn't ready for that spot. He was good, but he was very generic. Again, he wasn't booked well. The same issue he suffered from in 2015. He wasn't really booked strong. If he was booked strong, then maybe he would have gotten over quicker. But he's always been around, too. Like, he's been hurt a few times, but he's always been around. He's always put on quality matches, but more so now than 10 years ago. Like, I can't think of many Sheamus matches, really through no fault of his own. I think he's just a better performer now than 10, 15 years ago, but there weren't many Sheamus matches in those first few years of his main roster career where I would go, man, that was a classic Sheamus match. Whereas now I feel like we get that every fucking week with the guy. Back in 2009, he didn't really have that. In 2010, he didn't really have that. I don't really think it was until the Daniel Bryan feud that Daniel Bryan got those great matches out of him. Not that Sheamus was bad, but he and Bryan just had chemistry on another level. Like him and Orton had a few matches in 2011 and 2010. They were good, but they weren't like great matches. They were pretty good. Like Daniel Bryan was the first one to get a great match, in my opinion, out of Sheamus. And then he wasn't, I think the Big Show match was also really, really good, surprisingly enough, from Hell in a Cell 2012. But now Sheamus is just on another level, putting in the great in-ring work. He's a great worker. He's very likable, has that, kind of built-in respect from the audience after being here for so long. If he was a world champion today, as opposed to 15 years ago, I do think it would go better for him. He just has that longevity in WWE where people would respect him more, give him a better reaction, get into his matches and feuds, which they have at the mid-card level for the last couple of years. But at the World Championship level, I don't think it's going to happen now. I think we're kind of past the point of Sheamus winning one more championship at the world title level. But if it were to happen, I do think it would go well because Sheamus is that good. Your second question, I really like this question coming up. You said, speaking of the early 2010s, have you heard about the original plans, or how the original plans for WrestleMania 26 were to have The Undertaker versus Drew McIntyre and Shawn Michaels versus The Miz? Apparently, Shawn tells the story in the WWE book, My Favorite Match, that not too long ago, after he returned in 2009, Vince McMahon held a meeting involving himself, The Undertaker, and Triple H, where Vince told them they needed to help start building the younger talent and arrange for them to work with Miz, McIntyre, and Sheamus respectively, building up to WrestleMania. Shawn and Taker vouched for their rematch instead, with Shawn proposing the idea of him challenging The Undertaker at the Slammy Awards. So, I must have heard about that because it hasn't really been talked about beyond that book, I would think, because that does not ring any bells. But I must have known that or read that because I do own that book. I read that book 10 plus years ago. It came out a long time ago. So whenever it came out, I read that book. I must have forgot about that, though, because I thought that was interesting when you wrote that in your question. It would make sense because Triple H did work with Sheamus. I don't know if Shawn actually said that in the book or they just put that in the book on his behalf. I don't know. I don't really know that they would say that in the book if it wasn't true. So I do believe that, though, because, again, Sheamus was pushed pretty aggressively, pretty quickly. He obviously ended up working with Triple H that spring. He lost to Triple H at WrestleMania, but he did beat him in that, he had to fucking beat him with 3 or 5 bro kicks in that match at Extreme Rules the following month because they really wanted to protect Triple H. I think Triple H might have been hurt anyway, so they had Sheamus beat him to write off Triple H. So Triple H was actually gone for an entire year. We didn't see Triple H again on the show, to my knowledge, until early 2011 for that Undertaker match. So he was gone for a long time. But, yeah, I mean, so they really put the gas behind Sheamus to kind of get him going. But if you can recall, I think it was at Survivor Series 2009, a couple months, like around the point of what you're talking about. At that pay-per-view, they had one of those, classic Survivor Series elimination matches. The 3 sole survivors in one of those matches were Sheamus, Miz, and Drew. So that makes total sense that they were trying to push those guys at that time. They didn't have Miz win Money in the Bank until the following year. Miz and Shawn would have been fucking not like entirely random for Mania, but I think Shawn knew that his time was coming to an end. Either his contract was coming due, or he really just wanted to retire at WrestleMania 26. He's not retiring against the fucking Miz. I mean, but at the same time, I think Shawn and Taker have both said this before. I know what you're talking about from the book. I mean, I don't really know what you're talking about, but you mentioned that it's from the book. I feel like we've heard otherwise, though. I feel like Shawn and Taker, maybe just Taker, said that following that first match, it was so fucking good, and they knew that after it was over, that they immediately started discussions on doing a second match. So I don't know how true or how close we were to actually getting Shawn and Miz. Taker and Drew, that makes sense, because Drew was undefeated for a while. They had him debut in late 09 again. They started pushing him pretty aggressively. Same thing like I said with Sheamus. Drew was not ready for the main event back then. He was the chosen one, and he was good, and they never really gave him a chance beyond like that Intercontinental Championship run. They had him get buried after a while, but he just wasn't the same Drew McIntyre we know him as today or even 4 or 5 years ago. So he just wasn't ready for that at that point. They did have Taker work with Drew on TV going into Mania, though. One of Taker's final TV matches is with Drew McIntyre on SmackDown. Taker technically was the first person to beat Drew on WWE TV, coming off his return in late 09. I think they had it in storyline expunged from the record, and then I think Drew went on to lose to Matt Hardy or something like that anyway. But I think Taker, either he was the first person to beat Drew or the first official loss to Drew, whatever it was. They did work for a little bit in early 2010, and that might have been a test to Drew to see if he could go. That reminds me a lot of the rumor, not even the rumor, I mean, it was pretty clear it was where they were going before they changed directions. We almost didn't get Shawn and Taker at Mania 25, because it was pretty clear they were setting up Kozlov for that spot. Remember Kozlov beat Drew, or not Drew, Kozlov beat Taker on SmackDown, clean, in early 2009. And it looked like they were setting up for a rematch at Mania. And thankfully they went with Shawn, and because they were going to do Shawn and JBL as well. It looked like they were going to do Taker and Kozlov, which would have been fucking terrible. And Shawn and JBL, who had a good match in No Way Out, and that was the storyline they were building for months. They started that in December, probably with the intention of blowing it off until Mania, or at Mania rather. But thankfully they thought better of it. Did Taker and Shawn. The match was amazing, and we got the second match as a result. So, I have heard that rumor apparently, because I did read that book, I just forgot about it. It's not in my memory, because again, no one really talks about that. I just don't know how true that is, because I feel like they had the idea of doing a second match as far back as the first one, because they knew it was that good. And Shawn Michaels, if he was going to retire at WrestleMania, I don't think it was going to be against The Miz. I think the idea was always to do a second match. Even before the Slammy Award thing in December, at least in my opinion. But I understand what you're saying, though, from the book. Maybe that was just thrown in there. I mean, I don't discount the possibility, though, that they were trying to push new stars, because that does make sense, because it was pretty clear watching it around that point. They were pushing those 3 guys. They just started NXT. Like, it was pretty clear they needed desperately to build up new people, because that was around the point where Edge wasn't really around a whole lot. He retired in 2011 before coming back a few years ago, but he retired initially in 2011. Jericho took time off, like in late 2010, so he was gone after a bit. Taker was kind of part-time after Mania in 2009, 2010. He didn't really come back for a while. Shawn obviously retired. Triple H was never a full-time guy after Mania 26 for the most part. Batista left the company. John Cena and Orton were really like the last remnants of that era, because a lot of those guys left right after WrestleMania 26, and they needed new stars, so that does make sense. Your next question. Do you remember from what you saw, or when you first saw ECW? I know you started watching WWE in 2008, and WWE ECW by then moved away from trying to emulate the original ECW and just became a place for newcomers and veterans who had nothing else going on. In some ways, it was a precursor to the modern NXT, and even William Regal had become a part of it during its final year. Did you care about ECW at all during that period? So, yeah, like you mentioned, I started watching wrestling, WWE, whatever, in April of '08. It wasn't until like early May that I caught on to the fact, oh, there's other shows that WWE produces, because I would watch Raw and see that they were airing replays and promoting SmackDown. So I started watching SmackDown. And then probably within a week or two of that, I started watching ECW. So that was like the timeline of events. I watched Raw first, SmackDown a few weeks later, and then ECW right after. So probably around May of '08. But you're right, by that point in ECW, the WWE version wasn't even 2 years old. And it was already the C show, the precursor to NXT. It really is in many ways what we get today. Like, not even the competition show, which was a complete overhaul from what ECW was at the end. But like, modern day NXT is very much what ECW was 15 fucking years ago. It really is. Like, it's scary to think how very similar they are. They're putting much more of an emphasis on introducing new people, obviously, in NXT today, with the NIL athletes and stuff like that. But ECW, even 15, 16 years ago, they were having new people come in from FCW. Remember Ricky Ortiz and fucking, I almost said Sean Spears was one of them, actually. They actually had him on the show. Didn't do a whole lot with him. I think he was just a jobber, then he got fired, and then he was brought back, whatever. No, I was going to say DJ Gabriel. DJ Gabriel was one of them. Tyler Rex was another. And this is all like in '08, '09. They were really pushing the new superstar initiative on ECW. And that was where they had people like NXT today come in, get their feet wet before going to the main roster. And also give them TV experience, because it was a 1-hour show on Sci-Fi at like 10 o'clock or whatever. So I would watch. I couldn't watch it live because it was always on after I went to bed, but I would watch it the next morning before I went to school, like during breakfast or whatever. So they had the new superstars there. They only had one championship. They didn't have like a women's championship, but they would have people from Raw and SmackDown, a lot like NXT today, coming to NXT to work with those guys. And then they would have veteran people that were exclusive to NXT, or it was basically NXT, that were exclusive to ECW, that would be there, be the top champion, work with the younger guys, help get them over. It was more so the guys than the girls. They didn't really have a deep women's division on ECW. Didn't have a lot of women's rivalries and women's matches and stuff. It was more so the guys. But people like Christian, Mark Henry, Dreamer was always there because he was an ECW guy. I didn't really realize that when I first started watching it, because I'm thinking like, what the fuck is an ECW? My identity of what ECW was never what it always has been, as the hardcore brand from the late 90s, early 2000s. To me, it was always, for a few years anyway, 08, 09, 2010, ECW, like the developmental show for Raw and SmackDown. But yeah, like I said, they would have people like Regal, Christian there, kind of, working with the younger talent, the veteran people. I don't want to say like Drew Gulak. Those people are bigger stars than Drew fucking Gulak. But, we kind of have that in NXT now where, like Baron Corbin was there for a while. But at the same time, they would also have people like Zack Ryder, for example. I mean, he debuted, I think, on ECW to start. But he went to the main roster, went to Raw and SmackDown as an edgehead, whatever. And then he came back to ECW in 2009, almost exactly 15 years ago, and he kind of reinvented his career. So we kind of get that now, too, from NXT, with Raw and SmackDown talent going to NXT to kind of rejuvenate their careers and get their feet wet and kind of rebrand themselves and stuff like that with new characters, new gimmicks, whatever. We see that even today. So honestly, in very many ways, a lot like you said in your question, ECW, at that point, is like modern-day NXT. A lot of similarities between the two. As far as what my thoughts on it were, did I care about ECW? I actually did. I mean, I watched everything WWE at that point. Heat wasn't really around at that point. I didn't watch Heat because it was, I think, discontinued by early '08, I believe, or late 2007. But I did watch all three of the brands, and I enjoyed ECW for what it was. Like you said, Regal had a run there in '09. I really liked Christian's run when he got there in 2009. If I had the level of knowledge then that I do now, I probably would have been fucking pissed that he went to ECW instead of Raw or SmackDown to work with like Edge and shit, which they teased at the time. I just watched Backlash from '09 a few weeks ago, like about a month ago. And they teased Edge and Christian, but we never actually got a feud between the two before Edge retired in 2011. So it was there was never actually a plan in place to have them work together on Raw or SmackDown. Christian ended up going to Raw and SmackDown in the years that followed, but even then they never really worked together. They had one match in 2010 on Raw in Canada, and that was it. They ended up working together a little bit in 2011, but I don't know if the idea was to ever have them feud. I know they teamed, but I don't know if they were ever going to feud. But anyway, Yeah, I liked Christian's run in ECW. Zack Ryder, that was really where I first became a big fan of Zack Ryder. I liked his work over there. I really enjoyed it in late 08. Even Henry did some good stuff on the brand. Matt Hardy, I enjoyed his run there as ECW champion. Jack Swagger got his start there. Tommy Dreamer was the first, I think he was the first wrestler I ever met in late 2008. Like soon after I started watching wrestling, about 6 months later. I saw him at a hockey game here in Connecticut, a Bridgeport Tigers, Sound Tigers game. And my dad knew someone who worked at the arena, so he got us not only to meet him, because they had like a meet and greet with Tommy, but we got to go meet him upstairs in his suite before he went downstairs with the rest of the fans. So it wasn't like we just went in line and got an autograph. We got to go meet him in his suite, and he was wearing a fucking suit for some reason. Like Tommy Dreamer wearing a suit, like that's so weird. But we got to go upstairs, meet him in his suite, and got to talk to him for a couple minutes. Nervous as all hell, but we got a picture, got an autograph, all this other shit, before he went downstairs, which was really, really cool. And I remember telling him, I bring this up because he was on ECW at the time, and he mentioned, who's your favorite wrestler? And I said, Tommy Dreamer. I said, I enjoyed your matches with Jack Swagger recently on ECW. Because I'm sure at that point, no one gave a shit about ECW except for me. So, no, I liked it. In early 2010, I really don't remember much about ECW in like late 09, early 2010. That was when it was on like its deathbed. They had Lance Archer on the show actually around that point. Lance Archer debuted in WWE on ECW around that time, and then went to SmackDown briefly, got fired soon after. But yeah, Lance Archer was there for a time too in like late 09. I was there for when he had his first match in WWE. On the ECW that he debuted on in late 09, I was there for that in Providence, which is kind of cool. Now he's in AEW, of course. But yeah, long answer to your short question. I enjoyed ECW for what it was. I have more of a fondness for it than most because I didn't grow up watching the original ECW. I didn't start watching ECW in 06 and then saw it get devalued into what it was. ECW is a pretty solid show. It's a lot like NXT today, where you didn't really have to watch it. It wasn't really anything overly exciting. It was a shorter show, which I think is better. It was a shorter show, smaller roster, good matches, good storylines, good stars, had some star power, some fresher faces that went on to big fame like CM Punk in the early days of WWE, ECW, and whatnot, and Sheamus and Swagger and people like that. But that's because I didn't know the watered-down version of... I didn't know anything but the watered-down version of ECW. It was basically ECW in name only. That was it. They really should have just... I appreciated the effort that they took in blowing the whole thing up in NXT, but the competition show shit didn't work either. It was booted off of Sci-Fi within 6 months. ECW had a television deal. NXT did not. NXT did for about 6 months, and then they booted it to WWE.com for another fucking decade because the show was so bad. NXT, the competition show, fucking sucked. They really should have just kept it as ECW, but changed the name to NXT and just had the same style of show, and just not debut a million people at the same time. That was where they kind of went wrong with it. Which is what they ended up doing in 2012 by making ECW into NXT as the Full Sail show, but that was long after it was booted off of television. Next question comes from Chris W. on YouTube. He says, "What's up, Graham? Hope you're doing great and have a fine week so far, or having a fine week so far. Hope you had an awesome time at the Back to the Future musical show." Yeah, it was actually pretty sick. Before I get to the rest of your question, we went to the Back to the Future musical on Saturday on Broadway, off-Broadway, whatever, Winter Garden Theater. It's been playing for the last year. Alexis and I wanted to go about a year ago. Never really worked out. We finally went. Her birthday was yesterday, so we went for her birthday weekend on Saturday, and it was great. It was well worth the wait. It's not like the best musical of all time, but I'm a big Back to the Future mark. I think it's worth watching, worth checking out for any Back to the Future mark. The practical effects, more than anything, I thought were awesome. The acting was good. The musical numbers were good and whatnot. Got a T-shirt. So yeah, I thought it was a fun time. But he asks, this might be a loaded question, but what do you consider the best Fatal 4-Ways you have ever seen as a wrestling fan? I think AEW has had a couple of fantastic ones, both involving Sammy Guevara. One for the Ring of Honor World Championship at Full Gear 2022 that had a great visual of Jericho doing the Leaping Judas effect onto Claudio. And I think that was a botched spot, wasn't it? Pretty sure it was. And then he also says, and the other, at funny enough, at last year's Double or Nothing for the AEW Championship, which had the crowd giving them a standing ovation in the middle and ending of the match. What are some of your favorite Fatal 4-Way matches? Yeah, those are two good ones. I think my two favorite four-ways, that's a good question because it kind of stumped me with that. When I first read your question earlier, I'm thinking, man, what are some of the best four-ways that I've seen? Like, what are my favorite four-ways in WWE history? At least in the time that I've been a fan for. Obviously, there were some good four-ways even before I started watching wrestling. I had to look it up, kind of remind myself, what are some great four-ways that I'm not thinking of? I saw some people on Reddit mention the four-way from Backlash 07. That is a great one. I wasn't watching at the time, so that's not in my favorite four-way category, but that is a really, really good one. And no, it's not a four-way from the Fatal Four-Way pay-per-view, the one-and-done pay-per-view in June of 2010, a fucking abysmal show. That one had some decent four-ways. None of those four-ways I think will ever be remembered by anyone other than me. That show was very forgettable. No, I would say my two favorite four-ways that come to mind. One, from Extreme Rules 2016. I totally forgot about this until I read up on it. On that Reddit forum. I totally forgot about this. I was there for it. Extreme Rules 2016 in Newark, New Jersey for the Intercontinental Championship. It was Miz defending against, I almost said Claudio, Cesaro, Kevin Owens, and Sami Zayn. Just the chemistry all four of those guys had and the way they really kept the action flowing and the crowd engagement. That was a good show that also had AJ Styles and Roman Reigns on it for the WWE Championship. But overall, it was just it was a fun show, and that was also where Rollins returned. But the two best matches on that show were two of the best matches all year. That main event with Styles and Roman, and that four-way. That four-way was amazing. I totally forgot how good that match was until I was reminded earlier. I might have to go back and watch it. I think today might actually be the 8-year anniversary until that match, or since that match. Now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure, because I was there, I'm pretty sure it was on May 22nd, 2016. Damn, it's been that long. That's fucking crazy. I'll have to go back and watch that one today, because I guess today's the anniversary now that I think about it. So that match, and the other one that came to mind without even me having to look it up, was from NXT, Fatal 4-Way actually is what it was called, the NXT TakeOver Fatal 4-Way show, the main event. There was also the women's 4-Way between the Four Horsewomen. That's also a great match, probably an honorable mention of mine from TakeOver Rival the following February in 2015. But September 2014, almost a decade ago, again, almost 10 years, that's fucking crazy. It was Neville, Sami Zayn being another one. He was in both matches, actually, which is cool. Tyson Kidd and Tyler Breeze. An amazing 4-way match. This was back at a time where NXT was really, for a while there, really outshining the main roster. Better matches, storylines, more engaging show. The TakeOver specials were far better than the fucking WWE pay-per-views, which were largely mid. But that main event was incredible. Great finish. The crowd was white hot for it. Again, another match that might be worth a rewatch. That was a crazy 4-way match. A fantastic Fatal 4-Way. So those two come to mind. I saw another one that was mentioned a few times on that Reddit, on the Reddit post that I saw as well. The main event from SummerSlam 2017. That was a really fun match. It's not among my favorite 4-Ways. I thought it was a really good match. I might have to go back and watch it. Between Braun, Brock, Samoa Joe, and Roman Reigns. Kind of like the Hoss fight for the Universal Championship in the main event of that show. That was also a really good one. I'm sure there's more. I always enjoyed like Fatal 4-Way tag title matches. I think it was a 4-way match. I wasn't a fan for it. Like I wasn't watching wrestling at the time. I'm pretty sure it was a 4-way from Armageddon 06, right? Or 05. I think it was 06. Where I think it was Eminem. That was the match where Joey Mercury had his nose busted open. It was a ladder match. Like a surprise ladder match, tag team ladder match for the tag team titles. I think it was London and Kendrick. Might have been the Hardys and Eminem, because I know it was Matt that broke Joey Mercury's nose, I think, and then another team. And I've gone back and watched it. I thought that match was amazing. And that might have been a triple threat. I don't recall exactly. But I think the two that come to mind are the ones I mentioned from TakeOver Fatal 4-Way in September 2014 and the Extreme Rules 2016 4-Way from, I think, 8 years ago today, like I said, for the Intercontinental Championship. So next question of Chris's. Let's get the questions pulled up here. He said, what are your feelings about the article of Tony Khan banning AEW stars from watching WWE? I found the article to be pure fiction and full of lies since Ricky Starks and Dustin Rhodes were seen at WrestleMania that weekend. How about you, and do you feel this is just another attempt of slandering Tony Khan? I'll just say this. Always consider the source. Unless it is from a Fightful or a Mike Johnson from PW Insider, maybe even a Meltzer, I say maybe because he's not always credible, then it's probably bullshit. Especially if it's something that egregious. That sounds completely fucking ridiculous. I mean, you said it yourself. Starks and Dustin. Dustin's his brother, is Cody's brother, so that makes sense why he was there. Tony Khan was that adamant about not allowing wrestlers to go support their friends and shit like that, then he wouldn't have done that. He would not have allowed Ricky Starks to be at that show. I know Ricky Starks might be on his way out, but he still wouldn't have allowed it contractually. He would have said no. WWE has done that. AEW has actually allowed that more than WWE has, to my knowledge. I know WWE did that with, they let Bayley and Naomi go to, like, Mercedes Moné's matches in, or no, she was there for, I'm sorry, not in TNA, but she went to Mercedes' match in New Japan, the few matches she had there, but Bayley was also there when, as well as Mercedes, when Trinity maybe lost, but definitely when she won the Knockouts Championship last year. I think it was last year. Was it last year? I think it was, man. Time flies. But, I mean, WWE has allowed that sort of thing, not with AEW. AEW is no different. I mean, they've had Britt Baker go to Adam Cole shows when Adam Cole was still in NXT. I mean, even now, though, we've seen that on occasion. Like, that's completely fucking ridiculous. So, it's probably just a bullshit article, probably just a made-up rumor. I wouldn't really put much stock into it. And again, consider the source always. Your next question, with the NBA leaving TNT for Disney and Amazon, do you think this is a big break for AEW? And do you feel this will make AEW more attractive to sign a higher TV rights deal with a larger budget? I do. I don't think it has a direct effect. I don't think just because NBA leaves TNT, then all of a sudden AEW is going to be offered like a shit ton of money by TNT. I think they were always going to get a higher deal. Yeah, their ratings aren't great, but what other properties does TNT have that are more lucrative than this wrestling show that's on 3 times on their network throughout the week, every single fucking week out of the year? I mean, it's the same thing with WWE when their ratings were higher than they were now, but relative to the time, they've been dropping for 15, 20 years, the ratings have in WWE. But USA Network, NBC always held on to them, whether they got a raise or not, and they always got a raise to a certain extent, I would think. I don't know if it was ever really that low, the offer they were getting from USA and NBC to stay, because they didn't really have much else on USA specifically. What the fuck else are they going to air on Raw's and Raw's place? I mean, now they're Raw's moving to Netflix, but they're at least keeping SmackDown on Fridays on USA Network. So, you know, my point is that just because their ratings aren't what they should be, and we see bad ratings for Dynamite all the time, and there's not a lot of buzz around the product, I would be very surprised, just from what we've seen. And we don't see everything, but just from what we've seen and conversations that have in public about the relationship and how strong it is between Warner and Tony Khan, AEW, whatever, I would be very surprised that they were just like, you know what, we're cutting bait. Especially if WWE already signed with all these other companies. NXT's going to the CW, SmackDown staying or going to USA, Raw's going to Netflix. It's not like WWE, which we've talked about here on the show before. It wasn't completely impossible, but it was pretty unlikely that WWE would swoop in and take their deal instead. That's not happening because they're already on these other networks. So if Warner's not getting any other wrestling in the place of AEW and the show isn't awful and the show isn't doing 0 numbers and it's not like they're not operating at a loss to my knowledge, then why would they get rid of them? Not only will they not get rid of them, but they will probably give them a raise. They will probably give them a bigger raise now that TNT is losing the NBA, another lucrative property that they're trying to save money. I understand that, but they're losing the NBA is a pretty big deal. I don't think AEW, like I said, is going to get offered a bajillion dollars to stay. But I do think there's an effect there. I do think there is, you know, I do think that positively affects AEW. It's a lot like when the strike was going on last year, the acting strike, the actor strike, when WWE and AEW were like the only shows that could produce original content week after week. They look at that stuff, they pay attention to that stuff, and that's a good look for them. That they're still going, because they can, because they're not actors. They could still go and produce weekly television. Whereas other shows couldn't film or couldn't air new episodes because they weren't getting new content because the actor strike was going on for so long. So I do think AEW will actually benefit from it. Not like big time, but I do think they'll benefit nonetheless. Your next question. As a kid literally born in 1990, I grew up with my eyes glued to a TV. I was obsessed with anything on Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, and Cartoon Network. I even own vintage t-shirts of Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network show characters. My question is, what were your favorite shows growing up from Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, and Cartoon Network? I love questions like this because this is right up my alley. I was born 5 years after you, so I wasn't watching the same shows that you were. So you might be thinking like, So Weird. No, I'm not saying that it's so weird, but the show is called So Weird. You probably grew up on that. I remember the very last like tidbits of that show when it was airing in the late 90s, early 2000s. Like I remember that show. My era was more, and people like years after me will say, oh, like Good Luck Charlie. I think that shit is garbage. You might be saying the same stuff about the stuff that I was watching, but I think these were, for a kid show at the time, I think they were honestly very enjoyable. Far better than some of the shit they were doing in the late 2000s. I honestly think the last like very good to great Disney show they produced, and I wasn't watching it religiously in 08, 09, 2010, because once I found wrestling, I really kind of dropped off of Disney Channel entirely. I think I stopped watching the Disney stuff after like maybe 07 or 08. I think 08 might have been like the last of my Disney Channel fandom. But before that, though, I really liked That's So Raven. That was a great show. Loved Kim Possible. Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. Never really got into the sequel series. That really didn't do a lot for me. But the original show I really, really liked. I didn't love Hannah Montana, but that was around the same time that I was watching the network. Lilo and Stitch is still my favorite Disney Channel show of all time. I actually recently rewatched it with my younger sister she was aware of Lilo and Stitch, but had never seen the series. And she also loved it, and I remember like every single episode as if I watched it yesterday, because I was so obsessed with that show and Lilo and Stitch in general. But specifically the show even more than the movies. The show was great. They're all on Disney Plus, which is amazing, so it's easy to go back and watch this shit. But that was my shit. And like 04, 05, 06, when that show was airing leading up to that finale movie, Lilo and Stitch, the series, was like my drug of choice. Like that show was amazing to me. But again, I watched, like I said, Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. I was watching That's So Raven was still airing at the time. What else was airing? Life with Derek was another show. That was short-lived, though. Phineas and Ferb was like the last great show they did. I kind of fell off of Disney Channel by that point, but I've gone back and watched it. That was a great show. Recess was on when I was watching Disney Channel. That was a good show. I didn't watch it during its original run in the late 90s, I keep saying 2010s, the early 2000s, but it was always on in syndication before Lilo and Stitch, so I watched that. I watched American Dragon Jake Long, another good animated series. The Proud Family, another good series. I haven't watched the reboot series yet, but I watched the original one. A lot of good shows there. I was far more of a Disney kid than Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network. And Nickelodeon I did watch. I never really watched Cartoon Network at all. I mean, not that we weren't allowed to watch those networks, but they weren't really as appropriate as Disney Channel, which was far more family friendly. Not that Cartoon Network was inappropriate, aside from like Adult Swim and shit, which I would never watch anyway around that point. There wasn't really anything on the network that really appealed to me. I remember watching some episodes of The Grim Adventures of Mandy or whatever. I remember The Adventures of Mandy and Sam, I don't know. Whatever that show was. And you know what I'm talking about. I just don't have the exact title coming to my mind right now. I watched some episodes of that. Courage the Cowardly Dog. I remember that show. I would need a list in front of me. Nickelodeon, I watched far more shows on that network. I would watch SpongeBob was my shit. I love SpongeBob. I mean, they kind of lost quality after like 04, 05. The episodes weren't nearly as good. But I like SpongeBob a lot. I liked the Fairly Odd Parents. Thought that show was great. Watched a lot of the episodes of that. Jimmy Neutron, another excellent show. Love Jimmy Neutron. That show was fucking funny. Watched a lot of Danny Phantom. That was another really good show. Cartoon Network, I think it was on Cartoon Network. Static Shock. Pretty sure that was on Cartoon Network, but that was a great show too. So, those are some of the shows that come to mind. Didn't really watch a lot of the live action stuff on Nickelodeon. A lot of the live action shows on Nickelodeon. I did watch that recent Dark Side of TV documentary. I know you did too, Chris, because you commented on my review of it from Letterboxd. Pretty fucked up shit. Drake and Josh was always really funny, so I did watch that. I did watch iCarly early on. Didn't get into all that. I remember the show. Didn't really watch it. I remember the Amanda show. That was enjoyable. Victorious, that was after my time. Kind of watched early episodes of that Big Time Rush show. Alexis kind of watched that stuff more than I did. Then after that, I kind of fell out of it. So, yeah, I mean, long answer, again, to another short question, but you got me with the nostalgia stuff. So those are some of my favorite shows from that period. I'm definitely leaving some out, but those are the few that come to mind. Noel from Facebook, their question was, who do you see winning King and Queen of the Ring? Queen, I thought Tiffany was going to win. I said that a week or two ago. She's obviously not winning it because she lost to Bianca Belair in the semifinals or the quarterfinals last week. I do think Nia Jax will beat Bianca on Friday, somehow, some way, and then she'll go on to beat Lyra at the pay-per-view. I have Gunther winning, so I don't know if they would have two heel king and queen of the ring simultaneously. Even in 2021, they had Zelina win for the women, but Xavier Woods, thankfully, which he was the right call at the time, Xavier Woods won for the men. So they had a babyface and a heel. They don't really even with Money in the Bank winners, typically they have like a babyface win one and then a heel win the other. Royal Rumble, same thing. I don't know if they would have two heels winning it simultaneously. If a babyface were to win it, I would much prefer, as opposed to Orton, I would much prefer Lyra Valkyria. So I'm thinking Nia Jax wins, and then she'll be set up for a future opportunity against Bayley for the championship, which makes sense. To do Bayley and Nia, they've had a lot of matches over the last fucking decade. They had matches in 2015, 2016, 2017. They've had matches across the board for years now. It's been long enough where they can revisit it and it would feel fresh, especially on SmackDown, because they've done it on Raw, they've done it on NXT. To revisit it now would be fine. I do think they will do Bayley and Nia coming out of that pay-per-view after Nia becomes Queen Nia, which doesn't really sound right, but as long as Tiffany wins the women's Money in the Bank briefcase, that's all that matters. For the men, I think Gunther's got to win it. I think Gunther's winning the World Heavyweight Championship at some point, probably on the sooner side, maybe as soon as the Bash in Berlin show in August in 3 months. So he could lose here and he's fine. Orton has never won King of the Ring. Only 2 people, I think, to my knowledge, have ever won Money in the Bank, King of the Ring, and Royal Rumble. And I think all 3 of those people both of those people rather, are Edge and Sheamus. I don't know if anyone else has ever done it. I thought there might have been one other person. I don't remember. I don't think there was. I think it was just them 2. There might have been a third person. I know Corbin's won 2 of the 3. He won King of the Ring and Money in the Bank. He's never won the Rumble. I mean, a lot of people have won, 2 of the 3. Cena's both a Money in the Bank winner and a Royal Rumble winner, as is Orton. I don't think he needs to win it. I don't really know what else he would do with Orton unless he turns heel and feuds with Cody soon. I would have Gunther win and Nia Jax. Christopher L. from Facebook, his first question was, why do so many of the stars of the 80s and 90s have such a difficulty supporting modern-day wrestling? You hear these stars who have their own podcasts constantly bashing and ridiculing the way modern wrestling is booked and wrestled, and of course they have to rekindle their own memories of their glory days. I understand they are entitled to their opinions, and many of them even make fair points. But it gets to a point where they are downright burying it. Stone Cold and Undertaker have even refused to watch AEW out of loyalty. What do you think of the opinions of these stars? I think everything you said is fair, aside from the Stone Cold Taker thing. If they don't want to watch it, they don't have to fucking watch it. And I don't even really think it's a loyalty thing with them. Because Stone Cold, AEW is the biggest threat that WWE's had since WCW. But Stone Cold, is extremely, or at least was extremely aware of what was going on outside of WWE for a long time a few years ago. So if he was like the WWE loyalist that you kind of claim him to be, then he would not have been watching the New Japan show that happened around California about 7 or 8 years ago. Cody has told this story where Stone Cold was there, or he commented on a match that he had. Stone Cold, for those that weren't aware, was a big fucking Lucha Underground mark. Like, he was a big Penta mark. He had Vampiro on his podcast at one point at the time. Maybe Prince Puma, stuff like that. He was aware of what Kevin Owens was doing before he even got to WWE and Ring of Honor. So it's not as if like Stone Cold only has ever watched WWE. Taker probably doesn't give a fuck. But with people like that too, they've been in the business for so long, they just may not want to watch anything else. It's not like Steve Austin is only watching WWE, because honestly, if one, I could see him watching other shit. He just doesn't comment on it publicly. And 2, he probably doesn't even have time for WWE. A lot of these people, why would they want to continue watching something they used to do when at a certain point in your life you probably just want to move on? They'll keep up with the product, I'm sure. Taker's probably getting fed shit to say on his podcast about the current product, I'm sure. He probably keeps tabs on it. Do you think Taker's watching SmackDown for 2 hours on a Friday night? Probably not. He probably would want to be doing anything else. And the shows are good. It's not a comment on how like the quality of the shows isn't good or worth watching for them, but they probably don't even want to bother. The rest of what you said is accurate. I think people depending on who it is, you're making a very broad statement, and you're right. A lot of these people just don't prefer modern day wrestling because the current, state of wrestling has passed them by. Everyone has their preference, and that's fine. But you're right, though. A lot of people from that era don't really appreciate the art form, and there are a lot of things that the current wrestling product could be doing better. Like the constant no-selling and the super kicks and shit like that. That is fucking annoying. But there's certain basic things that you would think stars from that era would at least appreciate or see themselves in and stuff like that, and they just go ahead and bury it. Like Kevin Nash burying LA Knight. Again, that's his opinion, but LA Knight is probably, first of all, far more charismatic than Kevin Nash ever was. And two, he's the closest to like that Macho Man, late 80s, early 90s vibe that WWE's had in quite some time. So to go ahead and mock him for being like a character on the show when he's one of the most over people they have, to me seems pretty short-sighted. So again, that's their opinion. Like you said, that's the bottom line. They can say whatever the fuck they want. They've earned the right to do that. They've been in the business. But the bottom line is, don't be surprised when you see people from those eras shit on modern-day wrestling. And certain things they're very much right about. But if they just shit on completely everything they watch, which I'm not saying they all do, some of them are more critical than others. Some of them do make great points. You can't just say it was better back in my day and they should be doing it like this. If you're making constructive criticism and ways in how they can improve it, that's one thing. But if they're just like, oh yeah, it's not the 80s anymore, brother, then that's just being stuck in the past. Your next question, who is the more complete wrestler of the two, Gunther or Christian Cage? Ah, man, that's a great question. I think Gunther. The thing is, Christian is better, probably better in the ring. Christian is amazing. Gunther's gotten better on the mic. Christian's promos were always really, really good, I think. But when I hear complete wrestler or complete like package of a performer or whatever, I'm thinking of someone that the company will want to get behind as the world champion. Christian Cage is world champion material, obviously. He was world champion in WWE, TNA, and all these other companies and shit. But with Christian Cage, he was never the guy. Even if Vince loved the guy, he was never the guy that you were going to build your company around. And I love Christian. He's one of my favorites of all time. But he was never the guy that you were going to make your world champion like a John Cena type character. I'm not saying that Gunther is John Cena, but Gunther's a guy that I could see them building around, being a multi-time world champion, being booked better than Christian, and is still fucking great in the ring. It's not like Gunther's bigger than Christian, and that's why he would be pushed over Christian. But I think Gunther's mic skills are comparable. He's also equally excellent in the ring, can have a great match with anyone, and looks like a dominant force. Christian is not a dominant force. He's a great hand to have in the ring, but he's a guy that you put in there to make other people look good. A lot like Dolph. Christian, I think, is better than Dolph, but Christian is very comparable in that way, where he is someone where you have the world champions work with to get a great match and put them over. Gunther's the guy that you can really build a brand around. Christian's amazing. I'm not saying you can't build a brand around him. They did in TNA and on SmackDown for a time. He can also play babyface and heel very well. But you're saying complete package of a guy that I think the company would want to get behind? That's not exactly what you said in your question, but that's my interpretation of it. I think Gunther's the answer, at least in my opinion. Your next question, what are your opinions on Brian Gewirtz? From all that I've seen and heard of him, I think he's a corporate shill who kisses the ass of his boss and makes himself look worse in interviews. My first clue was that he was an idiot. Is when he made the comment of John Cena being so over because he appealed to the kids, which is a really stupid comment to make. But his recent comments about Cody being all right with giving the main event to WrestleMania, giving the main event of WrestleMania to The Rock, really irked me, and realized that this guy is not just a corporate shill, but someone who is as out of touch as anyone from Vince's regime. Do you have a different perspective, Gewirtz, or do you feel the same as I feel? I have a lot of respect for the guy. I mean, obviously he was partially responsible for a lot of the boom periods in WWE from a writer standpoint. And he's not one of those guys like Russo who just claims like, oh, I created the Attitude Era. And I think some of that Russo says just to get people talking or clicking on his shit because he's not really relevant all that much anymore. So he'll make like bold claims. I feel like there's a lot of people like that in wrestling and just in general. They may not 100% believe what they're saying and they're actually like decent people, but they just spew a lot of bullshit because otherwise people might not be talking about them otherwise. So, I don't know if, what I was going to say was, I don't think Gewirtz is one of those people. Because when he was done with wrestling, I'm sure he commented on wrestling, like you said, talking about John Cena and shit like that. But he wasn't really involved with wrestling. Like, he was obviously a wrestling fan, he always has been. But he's not on there saying, oh, I created the Attitude Era. Now, yeah, the Cody comments in that interview were very fucking stupid. But everyone makes dumb comments, so I don't know if he's just a corporate shill, because I'm sure even he would say that when he wasn't there, and not because just he wasn't there, but just timeline-wise he wasn't there, and the product creatively fucking sucked. He would probably tell you that. I cannot imagine if he was such a corporate shill. I mean, you said kiss the ass of his boss, all right? I mean, that I kind of put Bruce Pritchard in the camp of, because he's been with WWE on and off for decades and will defend a lot of what they do. I mean, today he works with them, but even when he wasn't there, he would still defend a lot of what WWE did and Vince's mindset on shit. I don't know if Brian has ever really done that. The Rock thing is different because he works with The Rock. I mean, he's The Rock's number one guy. Does he kiss The Rock's ass? I mean, yeah, probably. But I haven't read his book yet. I have his book. He wrote a book about his time in WWE, being a creative writer, all this other sort of shit. It looks interesting. I have a lot of respect for the guy. I don't dislike him, apparently, as much as you do. Is he a corporate shill? I don't know if corporate shill is the right way to put it, because I don't really think it's a WWE thing. I think it might be more of, he might be, obviously, he's biased towards The Rock. You said he made that dumb comment about Cena, about being so over because he appealed to the kids. I don't remember him saying that. Not saying he didn't. I just don't really recall that. I don't think he makes enough comments about the product to justify him being labeled as a corporate shill. I mean, I don't know. As far as I know, maybe he did have a podcast when he was gone from the company talking about it. I just completely missed it. I don't know. I just feel like he was a name that you heard about, but he wasn't really actively talking about the product, probably because he was so fucking bad for a long time. But yeah, those are my thoughts and opinions on Brian Gewirtz. I actually did interview him a couple of years ago for that Young Rock show. He was cool. He was nice. And I met him in person very briefly. I went to SmackDown at MSG a few years ago, and he was just sitting at a table. He was just like, it was, they had like a bar area at MSG, and we were there for like some sort of event. It was right before the show started. And I just went over and just said hi. Not really to say anything, but just to say hi. And I was a fan of his some of the creative stuff he did in WWE. But that's really about it. Those are my thoughts and opinions on Brian Gewirtz. Your next question, your last question here. Outside of Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, who do you think has the more complicated legacy in wrestling? Outside of Hogan and Ric Flair, who has the more complicated legacy in wrestling? I mean, Benoit, obviously. I mean, that's complicated because I know that's an obvious answer, but I thought you might have been comparing. When I wrote down your question, I thought you were comparing the two. If you're asking me to compare between the two, Hogan and Ric Flair, who has the more complicated legacy in wrestling, which I thought was what your question was, but you said outside of them. If we're including them between the two, it would probably be Hogan. Because Flair, I mean, the guy was never really the nicest guy, and he obviously had a lot of incidents of his own. But Hogan was, I mean, he just told a lot of lies, and the politicking, and then the racist stuff, which, I mean, we can really, what's worse between this and what Ric Flair has done and said and shit like that. So I would say Hogan probably is the more complicated legacy between the two. If we're not including them, I feel like the obvious answer is definitely Benoit, because he's regarded in the ring as one of the best wrestlers of all time, but you can't really acknowledge that without also acknowledging the final 72 hours of his life and what he did in those 72 hours. He'll never be in any Hall of Fame because of that. They can never really show his stuff on WWE. They can never glorify it. I mean, I can go back and watch his matches because it doesn't, like, bother me in that way. I can understand why it would for certain people. And I could sit here and tell you that, yeah, in the ring he was a great wrestler, but he was obviously a terrible human being. In his entire life, I don't know, but I mean, his life will forever be defined by what he did at the end of his life. So, I know that's an obvious answer. You probably mean something else by your question, but you mentioned Hogan, Flair, who also has a complicated legacy. It's him, because people still debate to this day, can we put him in the Hall of Fame? Absolutely fucking not. Like, you don't put a murderer, especially for the legacy. I mean, I know Snuka, like, he was never officially, did he kill his girlfriend, blah, blah, blah. I mean, he probably did, but he was never found officially guilty of it before he died. But I mean, the Benoit thing is, again, I don't want to compare like murderers here, but the Benoit thing is obviously way worse. Killing his own wife and his son before killing himself is pretty fucking like rotten hell bad. So, I mean, that's pretty bad. Next question from @Iwagu91 from Twitter. Considering her history, or friendship rather, with the Creed brothers, do you see Ivy Nile joining forces with Chad Gable as well? I mean, she could. I don't see it. She could, but I don't really see it. I don't really think they need a female member. I'm kind of worried for her on her own. I don't really know what they would do with Ivy on her own. But then again, they don't really have her interacting with the Creeds a lot anyway. Whenever the Creeds are out there on TV, they're not really with her anymore. They haven't been with her for a long time on the main roster. She's kind of more so doing her thing with Maxine Dupri. They can be a little tag team. They're not really going to go anywhere. I like Ivy Nile. It's not like they're going to put tag titles on Nile and the Creeds because she's their female manager, so it really doesn't matter. No, I don't think Nile needs to be with them. I guess she could be, and then you can do Nile and the Creeds versus Dupri, Otis, and Tozawa. I guess you could do that. I guess that would make sense. I don't really see her being a heel with them, but I guess she could be. Next question. Do you see the rematch between Bryan Danielson and Kenny Omega happening in the future, even after Danielson becomes a part-timer? I think we will get that match at some point. I think they both want it. I think Tony Khan wants to do it. I know there were rumblings of them doing it at All In last year before Danielson couldn't go. I know they were probably going to do Danielson and Nigel McGuinness, but there were also reports and rumblings of them doing even Danielson and Omega, which would have been perfect for that show. Because that was also when they were doing Blackpool Combat Club and the Elite were feuding, so it would have made sense time-wise. They didn't do it. Danielson didn't come back until right after All In. I do think they will do that match, and if they don't do it before Danielson retires full-time, which is going to be the next couple of months, Kenny Omega's not back yet, and I don't think he is going to be back anytime soon. I am still pretty convinced that we will get that match again. Your thoughts on Lyra Valkyria? I think she's really good. I think she's a great wrestler. Her character stuff has always been lacking. She never really... The funny thing is that she never really connected with the NXT audience. But based on how they've booked her so far in the main roster, and having her aligned with Becky, which was smart, there's a better chance that she gets over as like a fan favorite on the main roster more than she does in NXT. More than she did in NXT. I think in NXT, the part of the problem there, though, was they also had a lot of women that were just more popular than her. Like Tiffany connected more, and obviously Tiffany's already over on the main roster. Roxanne Perez, I think, is just a better all-around character than Lyra. They're both great in the ring, but I think Roxanne is more of a complete package. The bird girl shit, I mean, it was pretty generic, but Lyra is good. She seems like a very nice person, very likable. She's very good in the ring. She's had some good matches so far. She's been booked well. I think her main roster run's been going very well so far in the few weeks that she's been on the Raw roster. But yeah, I think she'll hopefully have a good career ahead of her on the Raw roster, because so far so good. At noob_n_co TV, their first question was, do you think Julia will be the right person to take the NXT Women's Championship from Roxanne at NXT Heatwave? I do. I know they said on NXT last night that they're teasing a main roster opponent, another main roster opponent for Roxanne. It's so fucking clear they have no credible competition for this woman, because the last three people she has beaten to retain that belt, I mean, I guess not including Tatum Paxley, all three of them are on the main roster. Lyra Valkyria, she was in NXT when she beat her for the belt and then retained the title against her, but she's now on the Raw roster. Natalya should be, I think, on the NXT right after Stand and Deliver. She's the main roster talent. I know she's in NXT now, but she was on the main roster. She's a main roster talent. And then Chelsea Green, which was so fucking random, and I don't really know why they had to do that match. It was good, but like they're both heels, and I didn't really care about it. She's also a main roster talent, so yeah, I don't really... It's clear they just don't really know what to do with her, and they're just kind of killing time until Julia comes in, probably to beat her. I know Julia just had a wrist fracture or something like that the other day, and people were worried, she might not be able to make it in time to debut in NXT by that point. I think they're not worried about that. If it's a small injury and she can work through it, then she should be fine. I do think Roxanne would probably lose the championship to her, though, because honestly, no one else in my mind is remotely close for that position. I know she's brand new and you're putting a belt right on her, but at the same time, who else is it going to be? Your next question, your thoughts on the entire first season of X-Men 97. I've never been this excited for an animated show before, in a long time anyway, he says. What are your predictions for Season 2 of X-Men 97? Yeah, I thought the show was great, so I don't know if I talked about it here before, but I like to watch a lot of like what people that I'm subscribed to watch and kind of cover and shit, so I'm kind of up to date, specifically the Marvel stuff. If it's like canon, I mean, this isn't canon with the MCU, obviously, at least as far as we know, then I'll check it out. I was always kind of threatened or intimidated to check out the X-Men original show because there were so many episodes. I'm kind of hesitant to watch to binge an entire series, but there were 70 episodes. They were like 20 minutes. It was a quick show. It was a good show too. So I watched the entire show back in February over the span of like a week plus. I just kind of cruised through it. And then, so I was ready for when the new show came out. The animation style is awesome. It was a much better show than the original, which is saying something because I enjoyed the original. And I watched a lot in a very short span of time, but I liked the show. This was better than that. This had more coherency, better action. Like, it felt like, oh man, like this is like must-see shit here. There were some throwaway episodes of that original series. Not with this one. They wasted no time. They maximized every single episode of the show. And they stuck the landing with it too, so... I thought it was great. I'm not a big, like, animator watcher. Like, I don't watch a lot of animated series. I watch some of the Star Wars stuff, obviously, like Clone Wars, Rebels, Bad Batch just wrapped up. I watched that, too. But I watched the X-Men in '97 series. And another thing is, if I see enough people buzzing about it, then it'll get me to want to watch the show. So I did. And I watched the show, and I thought it was fucking great. So I'm looking forward to the second season. As far as, like, any predictions, I'm not that deep in the X-Men lore to kind of make accurate predictions. But I saw some people bring up, we never really saw what's her name? Oh my God, Jesus Christ, why am I not remembering her name? The blue girl, oh my God, what's her name? Jennifer Lawrence played her in the new movies. Oh my God, no, Mystique, I was going to look it up, I just typed on my computer, but I didn't even have to fucking press search because I just remembered. Not Mephisto, Mystique. I thought she was in this season. I don't think she was at all, so I think the next season will reintroduce her. She was in the original series. But other than that, I have no idea. They kind of left off with the Apocalypse cliffhanger, which was cool. I remember him from the original series and the movie and shit and stuff like that. So, yeah, we'll see where Season 2 goes. At Reborn Again, John Ritland from the Twitter machine and on YouTube, Real Honesty with John Ritland. Check out his content. Does great work. His first question was... I was at last week's Dynamite, which had 3,000 people in a 10,000 arena. The previous 3 Washington State shows were at an arena in Seattle that holds 18,000. First Dynamite did 9,000 to 9.5 thousand Collision, and then WrestleDream barely had 11,000 combined. What can AEW do to boost attendance? I think it's better, like, not only where you're from, John, but, like, just in general. First of all, the product has to be hotter. It's just not. The product is not hot. But I think they could do a much better job of advertising this shit via local media. I mean, people underestimate the power of local media and advertisements. WWE, every time they come to town, they do a really good job of advertising on the radio, on TV. Hey, we're coming to Hartford, we're coming to Bridgeport, we're coming to Mohegan Sun for a Raw, SmackDown, pay-per-view, whatever. AEW, anytime they've ever been here for anything, I never hear shit. If I didn't see it online, if I didn't see the tickets online, I'm habitually online, obviously. If I didn't see it through AEW promoting it on Twitter, I would have never known that they were coming to Hartford for Collision or to Mohegan Sun for a Rampage or whatever the fuck. They just don't do a good job of promoting shit. They're never, like, on the news or doing local media. They do local media, but just not enough of it. They have to do a better job of that. Now, could they be doing it and then people just aren't going because it's not WWE? Sure, but when you have notable names doing the media or promoting notable names like, hey, we have Edge on our show, he used to be in WWE, or CM Punk when he was there, and people like that, then you are going to get people to come out and watch the show. But they just don't do enough of it. They're also booking bigger arenas when they shouldn't be. They should be booking smaller arenas like they were when they first started. They got ahead of themselves when the company got bigger, the roster got bigger, the promotion got hotter. Post-pandemic, they're thinking, hey, we can start booking these fucking bigger arenas like WWE, and then it looks like shit on TV because they didn't fill it nearly as much as WWE does. And then they're not going to, and that's fine. And they were outperforming WWE in some markets a few years ago. But man, have the tides turned. So local media and just booking smaller arenas. And maybe better markets, I think is the biggest thing. Your second question, is it just me, or does this year's Double or Nothing card seem kind of bleh? I'm sure some of the matches will be good, but the build has been either non-existent or involving people who just don't mean much. No, I agree. Listen, I think that's just an AEW problem in general. I think the pay-per-view will be good to great on Saturday. They usually are. Very rarely are the AEW pay-per-views bad. Even in the last 6 months, the product has been kind of meh. It's funny because like the one pay-per-view that I did go to was not great, and that was World's End. I mean, the 2 stuff that I went for did deliver. Joe and MJF, and Joe winning the championship. The Devil reveal, which ended up being nothing because the aftermath has been awful. And Edge and Christian on that show was amazing. Beyond that, it was a very mediocre show. But in the last 6 to 8 months, even though the product has cooled off considerably, like without Punk and, Punk not being there has really hurt them among other stuff. They have put on some of their best pay-per-views ever. I thought Full Gear was a really good show. Wrestle Dream was excellent. Revolution was excellent. Dynasty was excellent. I'm sure Double or Nothing will be no exception. But you're right, they don't really do a great job nowadays, I think, of getting people excited for these shows with the lackluster builds. They have done a better job with Double or Nothing and not Wrestle Dream. I saw that on your question, which is why it's on my mind. The Dynasty show and fucking Double or Nothing, what I was saying, they've done a better job of promoting those cards in advance and not just adding 10 matches at the last minute. I mean, they always do that. They always will do that. I fucking hate when they do that shit. But they've done it a lot less lately, and I think that's smart. Promoting matches weeks in advance, giving us actual builds, and not hyping up shit a week before. That shit is so lame. So doing a better job of that is key as well. His third question, he says, before I forget, a happy belated birthday to Alexis. Thank you, sir. I showed her that, and she said she appreciated it, so thank you. But he also said non-wrestling related. In the last year or so, many hyped up movies that have hit streaming quicker than ever before. The Fall Guy being the latest example. Is this the future of movies having less time in theaters? Yeah, I mean, that's just the way that it works nowadays. So the thing with Fall Guy is this. The movie just came out, less than a month ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever it was. I'm pretty sure it was earlier this month, not even. Is it on streaming? There's a difference, because I heard that it hit digital, which means that it's coming out, you can buy it digitally, you can rent it, or you can buy it on DVD if people still do that. I mean, I still buy some DVDs. But there's a difference between that and then it ending up on like Disney Plus or Netflix or Max. To my knowledge, that stuff still does not happen until at least 2 months in, which is still very fucking quick. I mean, I remember when DVDs, it would take like 3 months for the movie to come out on DVD after it was in theaters. Sometimes 2.5, but usually like 3. Now the shit comes out on digital and DVD within 3 weeks. And it's still out in theaters, and it will be out in theaters for a while. But if it's out in theaters, then why would I don't know. I would rather people would rather get the experience of watching it in a theater as I would than just buying it, watching it at home. If it's still going to cost you the same amount, I mean, obviously it costs more to go to the movies, but people pay for that experience. That's part of the magic of the movies, obviously, to quote Nicole Kidman or whatever. But if it was on like Max right now, I don't know if it is. I don't think it is. Or on any other streaming service, that's pretty fucking stupid. Like, they usually wait. What did I just see was on there? Dune 2, I think, is on HBO Max now. I don't know when it got added. That movie came out in early March? Pretty sure that came out in early March. So that was 2.5 months ago. If it's on streaming within a month and a half, 2 months, that to me is fine. That makes sense. If it's out of theaters, I think Dune might still be playing some places, but for the most part, it's probably gone. That's fine. If it's on streaming in 3 weeks, that's pretty fucking dumb. I mean, it's also, remember, there was a point during COVID where they were releasing stuff on streaming the same day as it was being released in theaters. We're very lucky that it didn't stick. Because if that stuck, which it didn't, then I know they were doing that for pandemic purposes. But if that was still a thing even today, the movie theater would be well worse off. People are still going to pay money to see movies in theaters, but the numbers would have gone down if they did that with every movie. Like if they released shit on Disney Plus and in theaters, I would still go to the movies to see some stuff. But I don't know if I would have seen, we saw If last night. I'm not sure if I would have paid to see that if it was on Max the same day. I would have watched it over the weekend. You know what I mean? If I'm not overly excited to see it in a theater. Also, to avoid spoilers and shit like that, I would probably have just watched it on Friday if it dropped on Max that day. So I'm kind of glad that still, that didn't really take off the way that I thought it might. Because that would have been a disaster for the movie industry, movie theaters, which were already dying anyway. But I still see, every time I go to different theaters, and I'm not always at the same one, they're still busy enough. Like, even when we went to If yesterday, there were a lot of people in there on a Tuesday night. Granted, it was like a bargain Tuesday, but, it's nice to see that theaters are still doing well, even post-pandemic, and even in an age where they are on digital within 3 weeks of being released in theaters. And that's going to do it, guys, for episode, 547, 548? This is 547 here today of #AskGSM, May 22nd, 2024. Thank you guys for checking out the show. As always, I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Also, be sure to send in any questions you might have by tweeting me on the Twitter machine at WrestleRant with the hashtag AskGSM. Find me on Facebook as well, facebook.com/graham.gsm.matthews. Drop a comment on the post I usually put up on Tuesday nights, if not on the wall itself. And last but certainly not least, drop your question down below in the comment section on this very video. I'll include your question in next week's edition. Have an awesome one, guys. Enjoy your Memorial Day weekend if you're in the States. If not, have a great weekend regardless. I'm Graham GSM Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.